Welcome to the Element of Success podcast, where we explore specific traits that break down barriers between you and success. We will achieve this by bringing on guests so they can share their stories. Today, we are joined with my co-host, Eric Johnson, and we're going to be talking about our first element of success, fear. Welcome, Eric.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How are you doing today?
I am fantastic. You know, I wouldn't normally say that I'm excited to talk about fear, but I'm excited to talk about this topic because we led up to this in the first podcast, right? Of why you chose this one, and it's a beautiful, beautiful story. So if you haven't heard the first podcast, please go back and listen to it. But no, I'm excited to get started today.
Absolutely, and yeah, to kind of give you a preference, we in the first podcast we really talked about why we decided to create the Elements of Success podcast, what our overall objectives are. I shared some life stories of my adversities growing up from rural Kentucky, and not only that, but where we are today and how we got here. And we really took some terms and some ideas that you could leverage to also overcome any obstacles that you may have in your life as well. And really the reason why I wanted to start with fear, and I mentioned this earlier in the first podcast, but fear is the ultimate idea or even detriment to someone's success. It really is. And someone's fear, they will be paralyzed and crippled by fear. And there's this saying in the Marine Corps, paralysis by fear, meaning that you are so scared to do something that you literally do nothing. Mm-hmm. And the definition, where I want to start is with the definition of fear. And that is an unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous, likely to cause pain. And really, that likely to cause pain is why we don't do some things that we know we should do. Is we don't want to cause inherent pain on ourselves. We don't want to do something that's uncomfortable. So sometimes that fear cripples our ability to do what we need to do to get over that pain and over that obstacle.
And I
would you agree, Eric?
Yeah, absolutely. What I would add to that is one pain that people don't really consider, because most people think of physical pain or some emotional pain, but I think a lot of people's fear is because they fear failure. And failure is incredibly painful, but a lot of times we don't associate it with pain just because it's not a physical thing, even though it physically manifests itself when you feel that way. But I think the fear of failure is something that holds people back, and they just don't want to be seen as a failure by anybody, even themselves.
Right. It's an emotional pain, and sometimes emotional pains is just as bad as physical pain, right? And the story that I'm going to share today on Elements of Success is really one of the most painful experiences I've ever had, not necessarily physically, but emotionally. And the date was March 19, 2004. That was the date. And it feels just like yesterday. It was a relatively cool night. We were in the desert outside of a city called Heat, Iraq, along the Euphrates River. That's where our forward operating base in Iraq in 2004 was. One of our platoons was out on patrol that night, and it was weapons platoon, so they were a mounted Humvee platoon. And they were patrolling outside along the Euphrates River, and it was around 9 to 10 o'clock at night. And all of a sudden, we were kind of just mingling around the base. All of the corpsmen that we had on base, they were running around like crazy. And up to this point, we haven't lost anybody in the war. And it wasn't until I went down to the command center to see what all the commotion was about. Why is everyone running around? We typically were mortared 2 to 4 times a week. So you always had to have full combat gear on, even to go outside your room. If you had to go use the bathroom, you had to be in full Kevlar helmet gear, because you just didn't know when you were going to be mortared. And it happened. It would happen multiple times a week. I've actually been on the phone with my mother while she was here in the United States while we were getting mortared, and she was kind of traumatized by that experience as well. And so I go down to the control center and I walk in, and we're all kind of listening to the radio to try to figure out what's going on. And that's when it came over the radio. And what was said was 1 KIA copy. And KIA in the Marine Corps means killed in action. And as soon as, I get chills even thinking about it right now, but as soon as I heard that come over the radio, I had realized what just happened, that one of our teammates had just lost their life. This was now real. It was, we're in combat now. And we never gave any names or any personal information over radio. So now you're in this waiting phase of, who is it?
Wow. Yeah.
Who did we just lose? So we're waiting for another hour for them to get back before we even figured out who had passed away. And his name was David. And I was actually knew him, not significantly well because he was a little older than I was, but him and I had multiple talks, conversations. We trained together, we've lifted together, we worked out together, and we literally had a conversation that morning about him calling home. And it was really emotionally stressful. I took it very hard. I mean, I was 19 years old, and I just lost one of our teammates and friends in a war that we haven't really experienced yet. So when they brought off, I waited until the platoon got back, as we all did. Mm-hmm. And when they brought back the body bag and pulled it off the Humvee, that hit me hard. It hit all of us hard. And I remember praying with our guys. I remember crying with them, and we all felt a sense of gut check time, right? Mm-hmm. This is the Marine Corps. This is what we signed up for, and we've just experienced our first loss. So I went upstairs. We all lived in a squad bay, so it was basically a big room with multiple bunk beds and things of that nature. And I remember walking in and kind of having that, they call it 1,000-yard stare or whatever, where you're just kind of staring off in blank space, and a lot of thoughts are going through your head, a lot of emotions. And I sat down on an MRE box. And I looked down, and I saw this index card just sitting on the floor, a blank index card. And we typically would use index cards to write orders or different mission objectives, and then we would laminate them and keep them in our flak jacket, etc., to pull it out. So if you needed to call a medevac, you would write OSMIAC, which is the abbreviation for what the medevac needs to get there to your location and to kind of have an idea of the situation and the medical situation. So we would write all of our acronyms down on an index card. Well, someone must have dropped this index card on the floor. So I pick up the index card and I just stared at it for probably 5 to 10 minutes. I just stared at this index card, thinking. And I took a pen off of my flak jacket and I literally wrote at the top of the index card, I wrote fear. That's all. I wrote fear in capital letters on top of the index card. And I started thinking, what am I afraid of right now in this time of adversity, which is probably one of the greatest adverse times that we had faced as a unit at that point? What am I feeling? And what am I afraid of? The number one thing I was afraid of, obviously, was death. I'm like, man, if my buddy who's 20 can die, I can die too. So my number one fear at that point was death. My second fear was letting my men down. I was meritoriously promoted as soon as we got to Iraq, and then I became the youngest team leader to lead a combat team in Iraq at that time at 18 years old. So I had guys on my team that had been in the Marine Corps longer than I have, but I'm basically in charge of their life and was kind of their leader. Wow. And that was the second fear, was letting my men down. The third fear was letting myself down. The third fear was, and I think we all go through this, to where we are afraid of not doing what we know we're supposed to do and what we're capable of. Mm-hmm. I think that can be a fear. That I know I'm supposed to be doing these things right now, but I'm not. And because I'm not, I'm afraid I'm going to fail, right? And I think that alludes to the point you made earlier of the fear of failure being a very emotional fear that a lot of people have today.
Yeah.
So after I wrote down my 3 fears, I flipped the index card over and I wrote down why at the top of the index card. Why am I doing this? Why am I here? Why did I sign up for the Marine Corps at 17 years old? That was the realization of, what did you get yourself into, right? And my 3 whys, so I wrote down 3 whys. And my 3 whys on that index card was for freedom first. Remember, 9/11's really what kind of promoted me to join the Marine Corps. And freedom back then was a big topic of discussion. We felt that our freedoms were infringed upon. We felt that we were attacked. And freedom for me was the number one reason why I signed up for the Marine Corps, and that was my why. The second thing was for my family. I had a lot of people. I didn't have children at the time. I didn't have a girlfriend or a wife or anything. But my family that lived here, I didn't want them to ever go through what I'm going through right now, which is war. And that's why I'm here, and that's why I've signed up for the Marine Corps. And then the last one is for my country. So those were my 3 whys: for my freedom, for my family, and for my country. Which, being 19 and a Marine, that's pretty cliche, right? I mean, that's right, Eric. I mean, you would expect a Lance Corporal in the Marine Corps to write those down of why I'm here.
Yeah.
And I did. But this is how I leveraged my fear versus my why. Is I kept that index card, and I still have it today, actually. I kept that index card inside of my flak jacket. And before I went on any mission, I would pull the index card out. And I would commit that I can only say yes to one side of this card. You cannot say yes to your fear on a regular basis and still achieve your why. It is impossible. You can't.
You're right.
So I would check my mentality before, even when I went into the gym. At this point, I'm like, I've got to train so hard and train my men so hard that none of us die, because that was my ultimate fear. And so when I went to the gym, I was trying to train harder than I could ever imagine, because I needed to say yes to my why instead of my fear. And not only that, but when we trained as a unit, I would make them train as equally as hard. And what it created was this synergy that we were all starting to say yes to our why far more than what we were saying yes to our fear. We were not going to let our fears cripple us in making decisions and being the most elite fighting force in the world at our jobs. And it just wasn't going to happen. So as I continue to go down this path of fear versus why, one of the things that we started to do, kind of a story looking back on now, like we were really silly for doing this, but maybe at the time we were geniuses. So I came up with this idea for our whole squad. So anytime our squad patrolled, we did something different than everyone else. And this index card was kind of what led me to do this.
All right.
So anytime we patrolled and we stopped, we would make it a point to stop in a market or stop where multiple people were and dismount from our Humvees. Now, you got to remember, in 2004 in Iraq, we didn't even have doors on our Humvees. Like the Marine Corps was so poor, we always got the hand-me-downs from the Navy, and the Army had luxury Humvees and everything they want. And then the Air Force, they had Burger Kings and Subways and everything else on their base. We didn't even have doors. So we were literally zip tying Kevlar blankets to our Humvees just to have some sort of extra protection. So we had to make our presence known in the areas we were patrolling that, look, we may drive around without any doors. I know you think we're crazy, but you don't want to mess with us. And that's what the persona was that we wanted to create. So when we trained, I had our guys start dismounting from the Humvee and sprinting at least 25, 30 yards out and sliding into or diving into a defensive position and screaming "set" at the top of their lungs. And when we did this out of just no reason, all of the local community started paying attention, like, who in the heck are these guys?
Yeah.
And not only that, we took it a step further, is we would either wear face paint, which you can see one of the pictures right up here, I'm wearing face paint in the middle of the desert. So do you really need face paint camouflage in the middle of the desert? Probably not. Or we would wear something that covers our face. Every one of us, you couldn't see our face. And what we did is we flipped the fear factor.
Yeah.
We took what we were afraid of and we put that fear into the enemy. That we're not going to be afraid of dying. You all should be afraid of dying. Because here's what's going to happen. If we sprint to get set and we're yelling set and we're all dismounting at a rapid pace, they're not going to fire a shot. They're not going to test us. They're not going to try us. They didn't. And guess what? They didn't.
Yeah.
Not one person from my squad died the rest of the time we were in Iraq after we started doing that. Not one person.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic.
In fact, we rarely got messed with unless it was in Fallujah or a bigger city. And the reason why, one of our captain, our company commander, he actually had a meeting with the sheik and some of the local communities. And they asked him, they said, is there a different unit that's coming in here besides yours? They thought we were a completely separate unit because of the way we acted within our own unit. So they thought we were somebody else. They didn't even know we were a part of the same unit, because what the other platoons were doing was they would drive into town, they would stop, they would all get out and kind of mingle around and walk around. Well, that's an easy target, right? You're being an easy target. And we decided on the first time we lost somebody, we wasn't going to be an easy target. We weren't. And we became kind of known for it. And it was because of that fear that allowed us to go through that adversity to overcome the pain of failure, of death, of all of it.
Yeah.
Right? So I took that mindset, and what I've done is I've applied that to business.
Okay. How?
Okay? So as a business owner, I still use an index card. I still have an index card that I've rewrote and made up, especially when I became a financial advisor. So the firm that I started working for originally, I had to literally go door to door to door in residential neighbors to generate business. Think of like a vacuum cleaner salesperson.
Which you
That's
can't
what I
imagine now
did.
during COVID, right? You
Oh
can't
my
imagine trying
gosh!
to do
Now
that
would be miserable. It would be. No one's talking to me right now.
They're just in the lawn yelling at their windows, right? I mean,
That's right. That's it. You know, I've been bitten by a dog. I've had people show up to the front door with a gun. I mean, it's been, and I'm in full suit and tie at this point because I'm brand new in the business. I'm trying to make an impression. And funny story. One time I knocked on this gentleman's door. And I could see him coming through the storm door, right? Like he's approaching me right now, and I could just tell, like, this dude is so mad, he's just steaming out the ears. So he opens the door, and at this point, so I became very successful at this because I wasn't kicking doors in Fallujah anymore, right? That's why I was successful at knocking on doors in the United States, is no one's really trying to kill me, so it's okay. Yeah. And so I knock on this gentleman's door, older guy, probably, mid-60s, opens the door. I'm like that, before I even get another word out, slams the door shut, walks away. And I've already had a bad day at this point. It's like 95 degrees out. I've changed my shirt twice, etc. So what do? I get off the porch. I walk around to the guy's back door.
Oh, wow.
And I knock on his back door. And is a single foyer hallway. So now I can see him coming to the back door. And he swings open the door, and before he even opens opens a word into the conversation. I said, whoa, sir. I felt like we got off on the wrong foot out front. I figured if I come back here, it's a new opportunity. I just wanted to introduce myself to you.
Uh-huh.
Still a client today.
Oh my gosh, seriously?
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
So he laughed just like you laughed. He laughed and he's like, okay, if you've got that much perseverance, what do you have to say?
Yeah, seriously.
And I just had fun with it sometimes. Some days you just got to have fun with it. But that fear, going and knocking on someone's door at their home and saying, hey, I'm a business owner, I'm a local financial advisor, do you have any questions about wealth management, things like that? That is a real fear. Like I was like, man, I do not want to do this. I don't want to do this. So what I did was I went back to my war days and I created a new index card.
All right.
So I wrote down my 3 fears. And my 3 fears in that moment, sitting in my car in the middle of a neighborhood in Ohio, was letting my family down. That was my number 1 fear, was letting my family down. Because let me back up a little bit. My degree from Ohio State was in criminology, terrorism, and Arabic. Nothing to do with finance, right? I worked for the United States Secret Service in 2011. I had the privilege and the honor of protecting President Obama, Michelle, Paul Ryan, and Governor Romney, because in 2011, Ohio was a pretty heavy battleground state, so someone was flying in every 2 weeks. So I had the honor of protecting them and picking President Obama up from Air Force One and all that fun stuff. I eventually was hired by the FBI to be on the hostage rescue team, which in fact was my dream job. That was the job that I've always been striving for. However, my wife and I have 4 boys. When we had our 8-year-old, that's how long I know I've been in this business, 8 years. When he was born, I had an epiphany that I don't want to go into federal law enforcement. Nothing against federal law enforcement. I just felt like it was going to be a lot like the military all over again, and I was afraid of what that would do to my family. Not anything career related. I wanted to coach my son's sports, and I wanted to have the freedom to do whatever I felt like doing. And so I called my financial advisor, my mentor, and I said, I want to do what you do. How do I do that? And he gave me a list of firms to go interview for. I did. And they basically said, go out and build your own business, etc. So fast forward, here I am sitting in my car, don't want to do it. It's 9 degrees out, full suit and tie. And I'm writing on this index card again, 10 years later, just like I was in Iraq. So the three fears that I had written down was letting my family down was number 1. I was terrified. Here I have switched careers from a guarantee with the FBI to basically have to build a business by knocking on people's doors. Yeah. That was a big fear. My second was rejection. I was probably getting rejected 100 times a day, at least 100 times a day, if not more. And then my third was failure. That was. I was afraid that I made this lateral move, jumped into a career, and I was going to fail hard at it. Because let's face it, getting someone to let a 25, 26-year-old Marine grunt manage their money with 0 experience is a big deal. Yeah. And I was terrified I was going to fail at that. Terrified. I was crippled by that fear. Crippled. So, again, wrote my fear on the top. And I think this lesson doesn't just apply to financial advisors. Eric, I think this lesson applies to anyone that is trying to better themselves. You could be in athletics, sales, ministry, podcasting, YouTube content. You could take what I'm telling you right now and apply it to any of those. Yes. So those fears, letting my family down, rejection, failure, I think those are real fears we all have at some point in our life.
Yeah.
But what were my whys? And that was more important than my fears. So on the back of that card, I wrote down helping others accomplish their life goals. That was kind of why I was doing this. I've always had a heart for helping others, which is why we've made this podcast, is to help you, help other people.
Yep.
My second was, from the first podcast, you probably got a good idea of my upbringing. My second why still is, to give my wife and my children the life that I never experienced. Mm-hmm. That's why I do what I do. And I would ask myself, just like I did in Iraq, which one are you going to say yes to today? Your fear or your why?